How do you know world politics? Are you abreast with monarchical issues? When I say monarchy, of course I mean kings and queens, the people who in the olden days used to rule. Long before modern republics and constitutional crowns, the world bowed to the majesty of empires. Some vast realms where glory, power, and divine favor were etched into every banner and throne. But beyond the marble halls of Caesar and the oracle-laden peaks of Greece lies a monarchy far older, higher, and more absolute. I believe your guess is right. That is the throne of God. You know what? Throughout history, kings and emperors mirrored heaven's throne in their earthly courts. Let me dive deeper. The Roman Empire, for example, developed an elaborate cult of imperial glory. The Aquila, or popular to us, the eagle standard, was carried into battle by Roman legions, and they symbolized divine authority and the emperor's sanctioned rule. To the Romans, losing it was a national disgrace, but to defend it was to preserve the empire's soul. Not only the Romans, but as well in Greece. In history, the gods are said to rule from Mount Olympus, but it was their chosen symbols, the lion of Heracles, the ox of Zeus, and the eagle of victory, that adorned temple pediments and battlefield flags. These were not mere animals, they were totems of divine order, at least according to them. They were guardians of royal power, and they represented the sacred bond between heaven and the earth. But the Bible takes us a further back, beyond empire, beyond myth, into the true control center of the universe, that is the throne of God. I welcome you once again to Steady Insights, and this episode promises to be wonderful. We are looking at a very popular theme, but yet not really understood fully. Something that many scholars have tried to explain in their own way, but this episode promises to delve deeper as we usually do. We are going to look at God and the cherubim, and under that, we will discover the messengers of fire. What do cherubim do? The reflection of God's glory. Then secondly, as a major theme, we will look at the cherubim and humanity. Lion, man, ox, and eagle. Then, how they are replacing the fallen. Stay tuned. Don't go anywhere. Also, I heard the voice of the Lord saying, "Whom shall I send? And who will go for us?" Then I said, "Here am I, send me." We find this wonderful statement in Isaiah 6 verse 8. But before then, what is really the background of this whole discourse? Remember, we are still looking at images, allusions, and symbols in prophecy. What we need to know in interpreting prophecy. And this episode tries to understand the use of a popular theme yet misunderstood, the cherubim, in the context of prophecy. And like we always do, we try to allude to things that are in the OT, the Old Testament, to try and make meaning out of these prophetic symbols. It is no surprise that in the heart of the universe, beyond the reach of telescopes and mortal sight, lies the throne of God. And it is the dazzling epicenter from which all life flows and where glory reigns without shadow. I personally believe that surrounding this throne are majestic, awe-inspiring beings, which we will understand to be the cherubim, and they are closest to the Almighty, leaders amongst the hosts of heaven. As we will discover, they are not symbolic decorations or mythic ornaments. But from Eden to the Exodus, from Isaiah to Revelation, these living beings have played real-time roles in heaven's operation and earth's redemption. Let's get deeper as we begin with God and the cherubim. What happened and how are they related? You might want to also look at the messengers of fire. Imagine a divine spotlight so intense it reveals the inner thoughts of your heart. Have you ever imagined such? That's what Isaiah experienced in his vision, and he had to cry out, "Woe is me, I am undone." We see perfectly that one of these fiery beings, described as a seraph, which biblically means a burning one, flies to Isaiah with a live coal from the heavenly altar. And it's no ordinary fire. In biblical times, fire was used not only for destruction, but for purification and consecration. The story unfolds as the angel touches Isaiah's lips, not to harm, but to cleanse, and assures him of God's pardon. The cherub didn't grant forgiveness, and that is an important fact, but delivered a message straight from heaven's throne. And that is where we find their purpose: to deliver, to declare, and to ignite hearts with holiness. Maybe you have come across the story when Christ talked about John the Baptist, and he described him as a burning and shining lamp. You would want to confirm this in John 5 verse 35. And one person who is aflamed by heaven for the dark world. But with all this background, the question that begs for an answer is, what do cherubim do? Maybe you are asking, no, this sentence or question is wrong. How can you say, what do cherubim do? Well, I did my English assignments. Cherubim here is plural, so it is perfect to say, what do cherubim do? We see clearly that the Bible introduces cherubim first in Genesis 3 verse 24. Just after, or should I say immediately after Adam and Eve sinned. And their first visible task we see is to guard the way to the tree of life. Cherubim, tree of life, are you linking them? Not yet. Their presence was not a terrifying blockade. In fact, and this is a fact for you, it was a glowing testimony that God's mercy still lingered. And that is something I find so fascinating and soothing. Many of us sometimes interpret the garden of the tree of life as a catastrophe. Well, it was, because man had been driven out of Eden. But the most important part, it's not the blockade, which even is not, but it is the presence of those cherubim and what they stood for. They were the glowing testimony that God's mercy still lingered and that his glory had not abandoned his creation. Let me delve deeper. The Hebrew word which is seen there as placed is known as shakan, and that is what we see in Genesis with regards to the cherubim being placed at the center of Eden. And in Genesis, it is actually the same root word where we get Shekinah, which is translated as the glorious presence of God. Wow. Cherubim placed, or in a more frantic way, cherubim Shekinah in Eden. That is why the Ark of the Covenant in the most holy place, for example, has two cherubims carved above it. From between them, God spoke, And the ark was not a mere box, it was a throne on earth, a meeting place between heaven and mankind. So, wonderfully, the cherubim don't merely sit passively without doing anything. And that is where prophecy comes in, showing depictions from Genesis. Revelation 4:8 tells us they cry out continually, mentioning a very important statement. Holy, holy, holy. And it's no surprise that Hebrews 1:14 affirms they are ministering spirits sent out for those who will inherit salvation. A reflection of God's glory. This is a very important part. I would crave your indulgence. Remember, in our previous episode, we factually discovered that 3 important personalities who happen to be prophets got the privilege to see the throne room of God, and in fact had another privilege to interact with some of the characters in the throne room except Ezekiel. Isaiah, Ezekiel, and John all record strikingly similar versions of the cherubim. And it's one fascinating discovery that I keep wondering about. Those 3 stories or accounts present to us very important themes which are consistent. Let's look at Isaiah chapter 6, for example. Isaiah displays to us a vision or a scene of a fiery seraphim. And those seraphim have 6 wings, crying, holy, holy, holy. And more importantly, they don't only depict this, but we see that in the throne room, the temple is actually filled with smoke. Ezekiel also presents another picture wonderfully. He also sees torches of fire. He then sees 4 wings, then 4 faces, and how they are also shining in the throne room. In Revelation, John, on the other hand, also has a glimpse of what Isaiah and Ezekiel had already seen in the Old Testament. John sees living creatures, 6 wings, crying, holy, 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 and they are all full of eyes. These 3 accounts, slightly different, but very consistent as far as the theme of the plan of salvation and the work of cherubim or seraphim are involved. The eyes that we see here are not merely for sight. They symbolize perception, brilliance, and spiritual insight. The cherubim reflect the incomparable light of God's presence. Wow. So we see clearly that just as humans were made in God's image, the cherubim are crafted for His proximity. Their every movement is a mirror of His will and wonder. Another segment where we try to understand the cherubim and humanity. There are 4 important elements as we try to unravel who really these cherubim are: lion, calf, man, and eagle. As we have seen in the accounts, the 4 faces of the cherubim are lion, ox, man, and eagle. Here you can identify that the ox is equating to the calf. Or in simple terms, the ox is also the calf. They are not random, but they align precisely with the banners of the 4 living tribes of Israel. Can you imagine? I believe you are aware that in the olden times, when God had established Israel, even in the wilderness, they were represented by banners. I'm talking about the 12 tribes of Israel. Historically, and even biblically, we have identified, and as you are also going to understand, there were representations of those 12 tribes. According to rabbinical tradition, the standard of Judah bore the figure of a lion, that of Reuben the likeness of a man or a man's head, that of Ephraim the figure of an ox, and that of Dan the figure of an eagle, so that the 4 living creatures united in a cherubic form described by Ezekiel. It is no mere coincidence. And you may want to ask me, well, you just mentioned only 4 tribes. That's true, but in the context of the arrangements of the tribes around the sanctuary, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun was on one side, Reuben, Simeon, Gad on one side, Ephraim, Manasseh, Benjamin on one side, then finally Dan, Asher, Naphtali on another side, represented by the lion, the head, ox or calf, and an eagle. What a wonderful discovery. It is no mere coincidence. So in Revelation 21, verse 12 through 13, the New Jerusalem equally is described with 12 gates reminiscent of the 12 tribes. And so wonderfully, 3 of each of the tribes are situated on 4 different sides, echoing the ancient tribal arrangement. And this is a subtle one, but a very powerful symbol. So just as the cherubim surrounded the throne, so too shall redeemed humanity dwell around the presence of God forever. Now catch this, and this is a fact. The aim of salvation is not only forgiveness, it is actually a reunion. God longs for us to be where He is. And that is the picture and story created and crafted by the function of the cherubim. We cannot move on without touching on a very important fact, which is replacing the fallen. Once the most radiant of cherubim was named Lucifer, and as we all do know, he was a shining one. But unfortunately, he forgot his place. He saw his own brightness and believed it was his, not God's. He was cast down, and those who followed him were exiled from the mountain of God. If you are doing your mathematics well, probably you would agree with me that there is a void created in heaven. There is a void of one of the most respected cherubim, Lucifer, whose absence has led to that void. We know that heaven doesn't leave vacancies. Revelation 14 verse 1 declares that those who remain faithful to the Lamb now stand where Lucifer once did, on Mount Zion, near the throne, singing a new song. Then the chorus in heaven changes tone, and that is the tone we see in Revelation 5 verse 9 through 10, as John had seen through a vision. You are worthy, for you were slain and have redeemed us from every tribe and language and people and nation. You have made us kings and priests, and we shall reign. Wow. That is where we are waiting. That is what we are craving for. From burning messengers to living guardians, from heaven's light bearers to symbols of human destiny, the cherubim are more than celestial beings. They are signposts of divine intimacy. And they reveal God's plan not only to dwell amongst us, but to restore us to His throne. When God asks you, who will go for us? He is not merely calling prophets. He is calling those willing to reflect his light as the cherubims, to replace what was lost, like Lucifer is going to be replaced, and to surround his throne in faith, like the tribes of Judah were surrounding the sanctuary, the ark of God, in love and in eternal loyalty. Let the heart reply as Isaiah did, "Here I am, send me."